Have you ever wondered what life was really like in ancient Rome? Not the sanitized version from history books, but the raw, unfiltered reality that shaped one of history's most powerful civilizations. Isa never expected to uncover the shocking truth about Roman society during her research trip to Italy. But what she discovered in those ancient scrolls would change everything she thought she knew about the past. The sun beat down mercilessly on the ancient ruins as Isa carefully examined the newly discovered manuscripts. As a historian specializing in ancient civilizations, she'd always been fascinated by the contrast between Rome's public face and its private realities. The marble monuments and grand architecture told one story, but these fragile papyrus scrolls revealed something entirely different: the intimate lives of Romans that history textbooks glossed over. Her fingers trembled slightly as she translated the faded Latin text, revealing customs and practices that would shock modern sensibilities. These weren't just dry historical accounts. They were personal letters, private diaries, and official records that painted a vivid picture of how Romans really lived. "This changes everything," she whispered to herself, knowing that what she held in her hands would challenge our entire understanding of ancient society. She couldn't wait to share these revelations with the world, even if some people might not be ready to hear them. Marriage in ancient Rome was nothing like what we understand today. While we often think of marriage as a romantic union, Romans viewed it primarily as a political and economic arrangement between families. Young girls, sometimes as young as 12 years old, would be given in marriage to men, often twice or three times their age. The father maintained legal control over his daughter, even after marriage, and could dissolve the union if it no longer served the family's interests. Surprisingly, despite these seemingly harsh customs, Roman women had more rights than their Greek counterparts and could own property, run businesses, and even initiate divorce under certain circumstances. Marriage contracts focused on property rights and the production of legitimate heirs, rather than romantic notions of love and partnership. The wedding ceremony itself was filled with rituals meant to ensure fertility and prosperity, including the bride being carried over the threshold to avoid the bad luck that would come from tripping while entering her new home. Isa was particularly fascinated by the discovery that Roman women, despite living in a patriarchal society, wielded considerable influence through marriage alliances. Noble Roman women were educated, unlike in many other ancient cultures, and were expected to manage large households and participate in social affairs. They could inherit property and, if widowed or divorced, maintain control over their dowries. Some powerful women even became important political advisors through their connections to emperors and senators. The journals of several aristocratic Roman women revealed how they navigated this complex social landscape, using marriage as a tool for advancement while finding ways to assert their autonomy within the constraints of their society. One particularly moving account detailed how a woman named Cornelia turned down multiple marriage proposals after her husband's death, preferring to focus on educating her children and managing her considerable estates. "I would rather be known as Scipio's widow than as another man's wife," she supposedly declared, showing a remarkable sense of identity separate from male guardianship. What surprised Isa most was the discovery that, despite rigid gender roles in public life, Roman attitudes toward physical attraction were quite different from our modern perspective. Romans didn't categorize people based on who they were attracted to, but rather on whether they took an active or passive role in intimate encounters. The active role was associated with masculinity and dominance, while the passive role was seen as feminine and submissive. Free adult men were expected to take the active role exclusively, and their status could be damaged if they were known to prefer the passive position. These attitudes reflected the broader Roman emphasis on hierarchy and dominance in all aspects of society, from military conquest to personal relationships. Many modern scholars now believe that Romans simply didn't conceptualize identity based on attraction the way we do today, viewing physical intimacy more through the lens of social status and power dynamics rather than as an expression of innate, personal identity. Roman attitudes toward public and private behavior created fascinating contradictions in their society. While public virtue and dignity were highly valued, private indulgence was often accepted as long as it didn't interfere with one's public duties or reputation. This duality allowed Romans to maintain a respectable public image while engaging in behaviors that might seem at odds with their professed values. The bathhouses, for example, were centers not just for hygiene but for socializing across class boundaries, conducting business, and enjoying various pleasures. Isa found accounts describing how even the most conservative-seeming senators would shed both their togas and their strict public personas once inside these steamy sanctuaries. The bathhouse culture revealed much about Roman priorities. Cleanliness, leisure, community, and the pleasure of the senses were all considered important aspects of a well-lived life. Even emperors would sometimes mingle with ordinary citizens at the baths, creating rare moments where the strict hierarchies of Roman society temporarily relaxed in the warm, misty air. One of the most misunderstood aspects of Roman society was their approach to religious worship, which often included elements that would seem shocking to modern observers. Many Roman religious festivals involved practices that celebrated fertility and abundance in ways that would be considered inappropriate today. The Floralia festival honored Flora, the goddess of flowers and spring, with theatrical performances that included rituals symbolic of fertility and renewal. The Bacchanalia, celebrations dedicated to Bacchus, the god of wine, initially involved secretive nighttime gatherings where participants would dance, drink, and engage in various festivities meant to bring them closer to divine ecstasy. These celebrations became so wild that the Roman Senate eventually restricted them in 186 BCE, claiming they had become a threat to public order. Issa discovered documents suggesting that the Senate's crackdown was motivated more by fear of political conspiracy than by moral concerns, as these gatherings crossed gender and class boundaries in ways that threatened the established social order. The cult of Cybele, an Asian goddess whose worship was officially brought to Rome in 204 BCE, featured some of the most extreme religious practices in Roman society. Her priests, known as the Galli, would voluntarily undergo rituals of self-transformation during frenzied ceremonies accompanied by wild music and dancing. These devoted followers would permanently dedicate themselves to the goddess, changing their appearance and adopting new identities as servants of Cybele. Despite the foreign and extreme nature of these practices, the cult was officially sanctioned because an oracle had declared that Cybele's presence would help Rome defeat Hannibal during the Second Punic War. Issa was amazed to find detailed accounts of how this initially foreign cult had been incorporated into Roman state religion while still maintaining its distinctive characteristics. The Roman ability to absorb and adapt foreign religious practices demonstrated their pragmatic approach to spirituality. If a deity seemed powerful and potentially helpful, Romans were willing to add them to their pantheon regardless of how unusual their worship might seem. As Issa continued translating the ancient texts, she became increasingly interested in the private lives of Roman emperors, whose behaviors often exceeded even the most permissive standards of their time. Emperor Tiberius, successor to Augustus, retreated to the island of Capri in his later years, where rumors of his excessive behavior became legendary. While many accounts were likely exaggerated by his political enemies, the consistent nature of these stories suggests there was some truth to tales of his unusual private life. Emperor Caligula, whose brief reign terrified Rome, was known for his unpredictable behavior and excessive spending, including his famous attempt to make his favorite horse a consul. Issa found court documents suggesting that much of what we consider Caligula's madness may actually have been calculated efforts to humiliate the Senate and assert his absolute power, rather than the actions of a deranged mind. Emperor Elagabalus, who came to power as a teenager, scandalized Rome by openly challenging gender norms and allegedly declaring that he wished to be surgically altered. According to contemporary accounts, the reign of Emperor Nero provided some of the most colorful stories about Roman imperial excess, ascending to the throne at just 16 years old. Nero is perhaps best known for fiddling while Rome burned. Though the violin didn't exist yet, he actually was said to have sung about the destruction of Troy. Historical accounts describe how Nero would disguise himself and roam the streets of Rome at night, looking for adventure and sometimes getting into fights. He built an enormous palace called the Domus Aurea Golden House after the Great Fire of Rome, complete with rotating dining rooms, artificial lakes, and innovative architectural features. Issa discovered less well-known accounts of Nero's participation in public games and performances, behavior considered deeply inappropriate for an emperor, as Romans believed their rulers should maintain dignity at all times. Nero's passion for Greek culture and his performances as an actor and musician outraged traditional Romans, who considered such activities beneath the dignity of a Roman citizen, let alone their emperor. Roman attitudes toward nudity were dramatically different from most modern societies, reflecting their comfort with the human body in both art and daily life. Public bathing was a central part of Roman culture, with elaborate bath complexes where people of various social classes would exercise, socialize, and bathe together without clothing. Unlike our modern emphasis on privacy, Romans viewed communal bathing as a normal, even important social activity. Athletic training also typically occurred in the nude. Inspired by Greek practices, this casual approach to nudity existed alongside strict moral codes about when and where intimate relations were appropriate, creating what might seem like contradictions to modern observers. Issa found letters from Romans visiting northern provinces, expressing shock at the local inhabitants' discomfort with nudity at the baths, considering it a sign of barbarian prudishness. The Roman comfort with the naked human form was reflected in their art, with statues displaying unclothed figures in idealized forms meant to represent virtue and beauty rather than to elicit desire. Issa was particularly intrigued by the discovery of ancient graffiti preserved on the walls of Pompeii, frozen in time by the volcanic eruption that destroyed the city. These casual scribbles provided an unfiltered glimpse into the minds and hearts of ordinary Romans, from political opinions, to personal insults, to declarations of love. Far from the formal language of official inscriptions, this graffiti used slang, jokes, and casual references that helped Isa understand how everyday Romans really spoke and thought. Some of the messages were surprisingly similar to modern graffiti: political endorsements, advertisements, insults to rivals, and boasts about romantic conquests. Others revealed aspects of daily life, like complaints about unfair merchants or recommendations for good food at local establishments. The graffiti showed that Romans, just like people today, used humor to deal with life's challenges, mocked powerful figures sometimes in coded language, and recorded their passing thoughts for others to see. The distinct social classes in Roman society experienced vastly different daily realities. From the privileged lives of senators to the harsh existence of slaves, patricians, Rome's noble families, lived in luxurious homes with interior courtyards, art collections, and staffs of dozens or even hundreds of slaves. Plebeians, the common citizens, might live in crowded apartment buildings called insulae, often in small rooms without running water or cooking facilities. Slaves, who may have constituted nearly a third of Rome's population, experienced conditions ranging from relatively comfortable for those who worked as teachers, accountants, or household managers for wealthy families, to brutally harsh for those who labored in mines or on large agricultural estates. Isa found tax records and property documents that revealed these stark differences in living conditions, along with personal accounts that showed how individuals navigated these rigid social boundaries. Most fascinating were the rare accounts from freed slaves who had managed to achieve wealth and status despite their origins, demonstrating the limited but real social mobility that existed in Roman society. Roman dining customs revealed much about their social values and daily life. Unlike our modern practice of individual plates and private family meals, Romans emphasized communal dining as a social activity. Elite Romans would recline on couches while eating, a practice adopted from Eastern cultures that signified luxury and leisure. The typical formal dinner party convivium would include multiple courses served over several hours. With entertainment between courses, these gatherings were important networking opportunities where business was discussed and social bonds reinforced. Isa discovered menus and dinner invitations that showed how hosts would use exotic ingredients and elaborate presentations to demonstrate their wealth and sophistication. The foods Romans ate varied dramatically by social class, while elites might enjoy imported spices, out-of-season fruits, and unusual delicacies like flamingo tongues or dormice prepared with honey. Ordinary Romans subsisted on bread, porridge, vegetables, and occasionally fish or chicken. Wine was the universal drink, though it was usually diluted with water, except at the wildest celebrations. The entertainment that Romans enjoyed revealed much about their cultural values and sensibilities. Public spectacles like gladiatorial, combat, chariot races, and theatrical performances were central to Roman life, providing both entertainment and opportunities for citizens to gather as a community. The Colosseum and other amphitheaters hosted events where gladiators, usually slaves, prisoners of war, or volunteers seeking fame and fortune, would fight to the death, or until one combatant acknowledged defeat. Contrary to popular belief, Isa discovered records suggesting that most gladiatorial combats didn't end in death, as trained fighters were valuable investments for their owners. Chariot racing inspired fanatic devotion similar to modern sports, with different racing teams, the blues, greens, reds, and whites, having dedicated fan bases that sometimes erupted into violence. The Circus Maximus could hold up to 250,000 spectators, nearly a quarter of Rome's population, making it the largest sports venue ever built. Theater performances included comedies, tragedies, and pantomimes, though Roman plays often featured cruder humor and more explicit content than their Greek inspirations. Isa was fascinated to learn how Roman society's attitudes toward children differed dramatically from our modern child-centered approach. The high infant mortality rate, nearly half of all children died before reaching adulthood, created a more pragmatic, sometimes seemingly harsh approach to child-rearing. Unlike today, childhood wasn't seen as a special protected period of innocence and development. Roman fathers had the legal right of patria potestas, which theoretically gave them the power of life and death over their children throughout their lives. Though this extreme authority was rarely exercised in the later Republic and Empire, children were viewed essentially as miniature adults in training, expected to begin learning their future roles from a very young age. Boys from elite families would accompany their fathers to the forum, public debates, and military exercises, to learn through observation, while girls would learn household management and textile production from their mothers. Education was private rather than state-sponsored, creating enormous disparities in opportunity based on social class. Despite these differences, Isa found touching evidence of parental love in funerary inscriptions, mourning lost children, and letters expressing pride in children's accomplishments. The lives of Roman women varied dramatically depending on their social class, but all operated within a patriarchal system that limited their legal and political rights. Elite women, while excluded from formal political offices, could wield significant influence through their male relatives and their control of family property. Some became important behind-the-scenes political players, like Livia, wife of Emperor Augustus, who is widely believed to have shaped imperial policy. Women from the plebeian class often worked alongside their husbands in family businesses or workshops, contributing vital labor to their household economy. Female slaves faced the greatest hardships, with limited control over their bodies or destinies. Isa was moved by personal accounts she discovered from women of various social classes, from the elegant letters of aristocratic women discussing philosophy and politics to the practical business records kept by female merchants. One particularly fascinating discovery was evidence of women's professional associations, like the female fishmongers of Rome, who organized to protect their economic interests, showing how women created their own power structures within the constraints of their society. Isa discovered that Roman attitudes toward physical appearance and beauty standards revealed interesting aspects of their culture. Both men and women used cosmetics, though excessively obvious makeup was considered appropriate only for prostitutes and actors. Women typically preferred pale skin, achieved with lead-based face creams that were unknowingly toxic. Wide eyes emphasized with kohl and rouged cheeks. Hairstyles were incredibly elaborate for wealthy women, often requiring hours of work by skilled slave hairdressers who would build complicated structures using wireframes, hairpieces, and jeweled pins. Men were expected to be well-groomed, but not obviously adorned, though Julius Caesar was famously sensitive about his receding hairline and appreciated the right granted by the Senate to always wear a laurel wreath. Perfumes and scented oils were used by both sexes, often applied after bathing. Public hair removal was common for both men and women, performed at the baths by specialized slaves using pumice stones, resin-based waxing substances, or small, bronze tweezers. These grooming practices were not just about vanity but were considered important markers of civilization and proper Roman identity, distinguishing cultured Romans from the unkempt barbarians beyond their borders. The Roman approach to health and medicine combined practical innovations with supernatural beliefs and questionable treatments. Public health infrastructure was remarkably advanced, with aqueducts providing clean water, sewer systems removing waste, and public bathhouses promoting hygiene. Military hospitals pioneered surgical techniques and organizational systems that wouldn't be matched for centuries after Rome's fall. However, medical treatments often involved bizarre remedies, like gladiator blood believed to contain the fighter's strength or applications of animal dung for various ailments. Greek medical knowledge, based on the humoral theory that health depended on the balance of 4 bodily fluids, formed the theoretical foundation for Roman medicine. Isa found fascinating medical texts describing surgical procedures performed with bronze and iron instruments, including cataract surgeries and amputations. These operations were conducted without effective anesthesia beyond alcohol, opium, or mandrake root, making surgery a terrifying last resort. Preventive medicine focused on diet, exercise, and moderation in all things advice. That remains sound today, despite the questionable scientific understanding that produced it. Roman legal concepts formed the foundation for many modern legal systems, but their application revealed values very different from our own. Justice was not equally available to all. The law explicitly recognized different rights and punishments based on social status. A crime committed against a slave was treated as property damage rather than a personal injury, while crimes committed by slaves could result in torture or execution. Citizenship conveyed significant legal protections, including the right to a trial and exemption from certain punishments like crucifixion. Isa was particularly interested in court records showing how women navigated a legal system that classified them as perpetual minors requiring male guardianship, yet still found ways to assert their interests. Despite these inequalities, Roman law developed sophisticated concepts like presumption of innocence and the idea that a defendant was entitled to know the charges against them. The development of detailed contract law facilitated Rome's complex commercial networks spanning 3 continents. Family law centered on the power of the paterfamilias, male head of household, over his dependents, though this absolute authority gradually weakened over the centuries of Roman history. The fall of the Western Roman Empire in 476 CE didn't immediately transform the daily lives and customs of the people living in former Roman territories. Many Roman social practices continued for generations, gradually blending with the customs of various Germanic kingdoms that established themselves across the former empire. Christianity, which had become Rome's official religion in the late 4th century, continued to spread, though it often incorporated elements of Roman tradition to make the transition more acceptable to new converts. For example, many Roman festivals were reimagined as Christian holy days, and Roman administrative structures influenced the organization of the early church. Isa found evidence that certain Roman social customs persisted for centuries in the Eastern Roman Empire, Byzantine Empire, which continued until 1453 CE. Archaeological evidence from across the former empire showed how Roman material culture, pottery styles, architectural techniques, artistic motifs gradually transformed as local influences became more prominent without Roman imperial standardization. The legal codes of various medieval European kingdoms incorporated significant elements of Roman law, preserving its influence long after the empire itself had disappeared. As Isa compiled her research into a comprehensive new understanding of Roman daily life, she realized that many popular misconceptions about the ancient Romans stemmed from viewing them through the lens of our own cultural assumptions. The Romans weren't simply like modern people in togas, they had fundamentally different values, beliefs, and ways of organizing their society. They didn't share our concepts of privacy, individual rights, or childhood. Their relationships weren't based on our notions of romance and partnership. Their morality wasn't our morality. Yet despite these profound differences, Isa found countless examples of universal human experiences in the ancient texts: parents' love for their children, friends supporting each other through difficulties, individuals seeking meaning and purpose in their lives. The graffiti scratched onto walls 2,000 years ago expressed humor, frustration, desire, and political opinions that remained recognizable across the centuries. The letters between family members separated by distance conveyed the same longing and affection we might feel today. These glimpses of shared humanity across time helped Isa connect with the ancient Romans as real people rather than distant historical abstractions. After months of intensive research, Isa prepared to present her findings to the academic community. Knowing that her revelations about Roman private life would challenge many established historical narratives, the detailed pictures she had assembled, from fragments of letters, official records, graffiti, and personal accounts revealed Romans as complex individuals, navigating a society with values and customs very different from our own. Rather than judging these ancient practices by modern standards, Isa sought to understand them within their cultural context, recognizing both the aspects of Roman society that fostered remarkable achievements and those that permitted terrible injustices. The sophisticated urban planning, engineering marvels, and legal concepts existed alongside slavery, extreme inequality, and violence as public entertainment. By acknowledging this complex reality, Isa hoped to move beyond simplistic glorification or condemnation of the Roman past toward a more nuanced appreciation of one of history's most influential civilizations. As she organized her notes and artifacts for the presentation, she reflected on how this deep dive into Roman private life had changed her own perspective on how societies function and evolve. Standing before the packed auditorium, Isa took a deep breath and began sharing the intimate details of Roman life that had been hidden for centuries. The audience gasped at some revelations and laughed at others. But most importantly, they began to see the Romans as real people rather than distant historical figures. "We've often romanticized ancient Rome," she explained, focusing on magnificent buildings and military conquests while ignoring the daily realities of ordinary people. But it's in these private moments, their meals, their relationships, their personal struggles that we truly understand a civilization. As images of artifacts and translations of personal letters appeared on the screen behind her, the ancient Romans seemed to come alive in the room. When the presentation ended, colleagues rushed forward with questions and congratulations. "This changes everything about how we teach Roman history," one professor admitted. The success was sweet, but Isa already found herself wondering what other historical truths remain hidden, waiting for someone patient enough to uncover them. Perhaps her next research trip would reveal equally fascinating insights about another misunderstood ancient culture.